Last time we spoke about the Tosus Rid, and he works with Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai that requires yayin. We had a problem with the Tosus Rid because Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai is a doraisa, and in that sense, if the Torah requires yayin for Kiddush, then how could it possibly be that Rava's conclusion in the Gemara and Shabbos is that if you have a choice between yayin for Kiddush and shemen for Ner Chanukah, that you have to choose shemen for Ner Chanukah. Because Ner Chanukah at the end of the day is only a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, and how could it override a mitzvah d'Oraisa? And Halacha Moshe MiSinai is a mitzvah d'Oraisa. So in order to answer this question, a good Jew will ask another question. And the question that we want to ask here is based on the language of the Tosus Rid. I have it here. Just a second. How come I'm not finding it? Here it is on my table. The Tosus Rid, when you read his language carefully, says something that's very ambiguous. And he uses a language which, to the best of my research, comes from the Gaonim. And he says the following. He says, Mushba v'omi marsinu hu kadesh, meaning the Torah required us to make Kiddush al Yayin. And then he writes, V'ein Kiddush el b'mashu kovea su'udaso o pas o al Yayin. So up to this point, I understand that the Tosus Rid is saying that according to the Halacha Moshe MiSinai, you have to use yayin or pas, they're both equal, because both are means to create a kviyas suda. You could be kovea suda through yayin or pas. That much I understand. Then he writes, Dichsiv v'karasel Shabbos oneg, which, as you and I know, is a pasuk in Yeshayahu Novi, midivrei Kabbalah, obligating us in the mitzvah of oneg on Shabbos. And one could certainly assume that the Tosus Rid is connecting Seuda with oneg Shabbos. That makes sense. But keep in mind, the Tosus Rid is dealing with the Doraisa. He's telling the Nazir that if need be, he will make Kiddush al Yayin. Nazir is enjoined from drinking wine. If a Nazir drinks a revius of Yayin, he gets Malchus. Elo what? Yayin shel Kiddush is excluded because of what? Because of a Karosel Shabbos Oneg, which is only a pasuk in Divrei Kabbalah. And the plot grows thicker because on the next line he says, Hilka chayev hu lechol. Lechol is in a case where he's making Kiddush al pas, and he had taken a neder that he would not eat bread. V'lavor al shvuasov al nidro. He will violate his neder or his shvua. If he looks say he take a shvuah, she won't eat any bread. Now listen to the next few words in the Tosfos Rid. Kidei sheyehei oneg b'makom kriya. End of sentence, end of paragraph. How do you translate those words? Kidei sheyehei oneg b'makom kriya. And once again, oneg is based on a pasuk in Divrei Kabbalah. It's not even a doraisa. And what does it mean b'makom kriya? So we're suggesting the following pshat in the Tosfos Rid, and I think it's very new and, shall we say, very revolutionary. I'm even afraid to present it. That according to Tosfos Rid, the Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai is adding pas or yayin, not for the mitzvah of Zocher es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho, because that mitzvah could be fulfilled without pas and without yayin. As we've seen in many other Rishonim, the Rambam, the Rash Ben Shuvas, Minchas Chinuch makes a big deal about this, that you could be Yotzei Kiddush without yayin, without pas. So what now is being introduced by the Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai in the framework of the Tosfos Rid? The mitzvah of Seudah. And yayin and pas is necessary in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Seudah. Now you may argue, wait a minute, we're talking about Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai, we're talking about a doraisa. Suda is only a drabana. Although it's true that the Gemara in Shabbos Daf Kuf Yutes derives Seudah from the 3 times that it says Hayom, Echlu, Hayom, Echlu, Hayom, Echlu, Hayom in Man. And each Hayom generates a different and adds another Chiv Suda. All told, it says Hayom 3 times, you need 3 Sudos. But I would submit to you that according to the Rishonim, that's only an asmachta. That's not a doraisa. But maybe after reading this paragraph in the Tosfos Rid, I might suggest another view that the drashos of Hayom, Hayom, Hayom are doraisa. Again, it's very, very new, but that the Torah requires 3 sudos. Now, what kicks off a Suda Shabbos? Now, you might say, well, I look at sunset on Friday, I eat a Suda, that's a Suda Shabbos. Why not? It's a Suda on Shabbos. Says the Tosfos Rid, no. B'makom kriya, and the word kriya, I believe, means Kiddush, sham tehei onik. Sham, there, as the makom of Kiddush is set up as the place for Suda. It's not enough just to eat a Suda on Shabbos. Say, Fartik, it's a Suda on Shabbos. No, you have to set up the Suda in a specific location, and you have to designate that location. And the halachic mechanism for designating the location, which is going to allow the Suda to take on the complexion and the status of a Suda Shabbos, is Kiddush. Kiddush is the designation of that makom. So when I recite Kiddush, besides fulfilling the mitzvah of Zochas Yom Shabbos L'Kadsho, I'm also setting up a makom Suda. Because I'm saying, well, today is Shabbos, a day granted, endowed with the sanctity of Shabbos, and now I'm going to eat my Suda exactly where I said Kiddush. So now the makom Suda is going to be established as a legal entity through a linkage between the Kiddush and the makom. But now, it's not enough that you recite the Kiddush in that makom, because the Kiddush is Dvarim B'Alma. That's not enough to set up the Suda. So the Kiddush has to include within it the Haschalas HaSuda, the beginning of the Suda. The Kiddush will kick off the Suda. So now the Kiddush is doing sort of like two things, but they're really one. It's the beginning of the Suda, it sets up the Makom Suda, and it facilitates the mitzvah of Suda. All this, according to the Tosfos Rid, is derived from the Halacha Moshe MiSinai. Meaning, on the one hand, we have the Torah, the explicit pasuk Zochas Yom Shabbos Kadsho, and that requires dibur, imre, amiros shel sheva. And now we have Halacha Moshe MiSinai that's adding a brand new kiyum, and it's telling me that through the Kiddush, I'm going to makayim this new kiyum, which is called Seuda Shabbos. I will use the pasuk of Hayom in the Parsha of Man to support the Halacha Moshe MiSinai. In other words, there's going to be like kind of integration here between the Halacha Moshe MiSinai and the drasha of Hayom. And when I combine the two, I upgrade the Hayom from an asmachta to a level of a doraisa to establish that we have a new mitzvah here called Seuda. I need to establish Seuda. How do I do that? Through Kiddush. Joe, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just wanted to, but that does that not make a difference between bread and wine?
Right.
They
But
both have.
Tosfos Rid is outspoken about it. I could read it to you over and over again. He says, Yayin v'kiddush, yayin v'pas shovim.
But the Rav's whole basis is to try to emphasize the concept of the yain itself, not.
No, not
So
in the Tosfos Rid.
I understand,
Tosfos Rid is equating yayin and pas. They're both methods of establishing a suda.
but let me ask you the concept of oneg, what it's talking about. Could you say that the oneg, it's the mentioning of oneg as opposed to suda or anything like that is a is emphasizing that there would have to be an oneg with regards to the yayin? In other words, let's say somebody he doesn't want to have one,
Right.
or something like
He
that.
doesn't enjoy the wine.
Right,
It's not pleasurable for him.
right.
Like very,
So,
very often, people make kiddush on dry wine, which is fine. But you might have people sitting at the table that don't have any appreciation for dry wine. It's an acquired taste, as they say. So
right,
would you be Makayim the mitzvah of oneg if you don't enjoy the wine that you're drinking?
right. Like so,
I don't know.
according
But
to him, that's
I
that
would
he's trying to
say
add.
I would just say that the drinking of wine could be understood on two levels. On one level, it's oneg, like you say, I enjoy drinking the wine, I get physical pleasure from it. But on another level, it's kind of a legal formal act. Like, for example, you find that the Torah says Ein Shir El Yayin, or for example, you have a koshel bracha. So I wouldn't say that if you establish a koshel bracha that requires yayin for, let it be sheva brachas, let it be berachas nesuin, whatever it might be, that if you don't enjoy the wine, that undermines and negates your kiyum of bracha al yayin to set up a what's it called, well, we'll just call it a bracha al yayin. That's good enough.
But reverse on the Pella is then that you would still say that a nozer should drink the wine.
Right, right. So let's get back to that in just 1 minute, Bob, because that's an excellent point. But before that, I want to say the following, that Rav's conclusion that for the sake of Ner Chanukah, which is only a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, I will give up on yayin or pas for Kiddush, which is doraisa, according to Tosfos Rid, derived from Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai, can now, I think, be appreciated and understood, notwithstanding Barbie's problem about nazi, which we have to deal with. What do I mean to say that I could at least understand Rava and the significance of Yayin of Ner Chanukah to trump Yayin L'Kiddush? So, in order to understand that, we want to quote two Rambams. One Rambam is in Hilchos Shchita, another is in Hilchos Mikvos. And please remind me if I ever discuss this with you, because to the best of my knowledge, we've never touched on this. Because I believe that the Rambam, if you take these two halachas in the Rambam and combine them, will give us an insight into the mechanism of Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai. So do I have your agreement that you'll stop me if I already shared this with you? Because I don't think I ever taught this to anybody. The Rambam in Hilchos Shchita has a list of 8 treifos. In other words, there are 8 situations in which your shchita is not valid because of one of 8 categories of treifos. Now the Rambam says that you could subdivide these 8 treifos into 2 categories. One category is called drisa or dores, dalid vav reish samach. The other 7 belong to a different category. And the Rambam says the following: of the 8 sugei treifos, categories of treifos, only one of them is written in the Torah. The other 7 are derived from Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai. And the Rambam says that only dores, that is D'oraisa, and that's in the pasuk. Says the Rambam, the nafkamina is going to be a case of suffix. I shechted an animal, and I find something which I'm not sure, I cannot be definite and certain about identifying it as a treifa. The Rambam says the following: if it's dores, a suffix dores, the animal is awesome. And we apply the principle of suffix doraisa l'chumra. But if the suffix falls on one of the other 7 categories of treifos, which are only Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai, then suffix l'kula, and we don't apply the principle of suffix doraisa l'chumra. The Rambam is a pella, not because the Rishonim reject the Rambam, I don't mean that, but because the Rambam is now revealing to us that there's a fundamental difference between something which is written in the pasuk explicitly and that which is derived through the, if I could use the term, Sanaitic transmission. To such an extent that that difference will impact on the halacha, the klal of suffix doraisa l'chumra. And we will not apply suffix doraisa l'chumra with regard to Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai. Pella. By the way, the Rambam elsewhere in Hilchos Machalos Asur seems to reiterate that principle with regard to Orla in Chutz La'aretz. The Rambam writes that Orla in Chutz La'aretz is Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai. If you open up to Parshas Kiddush, which we read last Shabbos, you'll see that the Torah says explicitly, Ki tavo la'aretz. Unetatem kol pri eitz, and so forth and so on. The Parsha of Orla opens up with the introduction, Ki tavo la'aretz. So the whole institution of Arla and Chutzlaritz is Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai. And then the Rambam writes that in Suffolk Arla b'Chutzlaritz, so you have a situation where you don't know in Canada whether this is Arla or not Arla, Lakula. This, despite the fact that Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai is Doraisa, but it's Doraisa from one perspective, but it's not really 100% Doraisa. Did I ever mention to you a famous question about clapping our rovos? When do we clap our rovos? Right? Can you help me out with that?
At the end of
Hoshana Rabbah, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Not so simple logically. I mean, there's no question about it. But everyone raises the following question. By the way, clapping aravas is called chibut arava, and it doesn't appear in the Torah. So apparently, back at the time of the Mikdash, they had a chibut arava. But when did they do chibut arava when the Mikdash stood? Every single day of Sukkot. We don't have the Mikdash, but we have what's called Zeichel Mikdash. But that Zeichel Mikdash of Chibur Arava only takes place on the 7th day of Sukkot, not the first 6, which is very peculiar because if we're replicating what went on in the Mikdash, then Chibur Arava took place every day of Sukkot. So amongst various answers to this question, many will answer that because Arava in Mikdash was only Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai, and it doesn't appear anywhere in the Torah, then in the Zeichel Mikdash for a Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai, we could be Mekil, and all we need is to reduce the 7 days to 1 day. But the bottom line of this whole discussion is that Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai does not equal a Doraisa, and there are kulos that we find with regard to Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai. But what I'm trying to figure out is, do we have some sort of a rule of thumb within halacha to know when we could say about Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai that it's more lenient than a doraisa? So for this, I quote to you a Rambam in Hilchos Mikvos. Right, you have half of the 40 saw in one gigantic mechal, how do you say it in English, receptacle. You have another receptacle which has another 20 saw. Can you be tovel? Well, a mikveh requires 40 saw. And there's a wall separating these two receptacles. So the halacha is that if that wall has an opening, it's called a nekev, then you combine, I don't mean physically, but I mean halachically, you combine this 20 saw with this 20 saw because the mechitza, the kosel that separates them, has a nekev in it. But how big is the nekev? Is it enough that I take I take some sort of small screwdriver and I plug a hole in? So the Rambam in Hilchos Mikvos has a discussion about a Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai that sets up the shear of the nekev. I will deliberately avoid any details here because it's very complicated to calculate exactly what the nekev, the size of the nekev is. Now the Rambam wants to know what happens in a case of a suffix. I don't know whether the nekev is large enough to allow integrating the two bodies of water. Maybe it's not large enough. You need a shear of a nekev. So the Rambam says the following, that you have to go l'chumra. Wait a second. You have a suffix on Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai. We've already seen the Rambam in Hilchos Trefos in Shchita that the Rambam establishes that you go l'kula in a suffix. Yet here in Mikvos, he's going l'chumra, and you cannot be tovel. If you knew that the Negev was definitely large enough, then you could be tovel in these 20 so, you could be tovel in these 20 so. It would make no difference because we have a chibur, we connect them together. But if you have a suffix, and you're not certain that the nekev is large enough, that becomes a suffix on Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai regarding the shear of nekev, then you can't be tov. Then you have to be mach. Why? It's Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai. And we said that in suffix and Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai we could be mekil. Are you following me? I mean, again, I'm giving you like kolatar kula regalachas here. So the Rambam himself asks this question. And the Rambam says the following. He says that this Halacha Moshe MiSinai is different than every other Halacha Moshe MiSinai. That's not his language. I'm dramatizing it. Why? Because the Rambam says that Iker Tvila Min Torah, the fact that a Tomei could only purify himself through a mikvah, that's written in the Torah. The Halacha Moshe MiSinai of the shear of Nekev is not creating something brand new, but rather it's defining what the Torah had in mind when it said that the Tomei can be Tovel and Mitar himself in a mikvah. So when the Halacha Moshe MiSinai functions not to create a brand new category, but to tell you when the Torah category applies, when it sheds a light on the Torah law, says the Rambam, then in suffix you have to go l'chumra, which we're interpreting to mean that then Halacha Moshe MiSinai is exactly identical to a doraisa. It doesn't fall short of a doraisa. Has all the same chumras hadin as a doraisa. And the reason for that is because the Halacha Moshe MiSinai is really a subcategory of a doraisa, of something that's in the Torah. It's only revealing and defining when that Torah law applies. In the case of trefos, each category of trefa is creating a brand new halacha. And it's telling me that this is treif, the animal is treif. The Torah doesn't tell me that the animal is treif. The Halacha Moshe MiSinai determines that the animal is treif. So we now, combining these two Rambams, will set up the following two principles to answer the question, what is the status and the chumrah status of Halacha Moshe MiSinai? A and B. The first klal says, well, if the Halacha Moshe MiSinai is coming to set up a parsha in the Torah and define its applicability or its application, then in such a case, we're going to say that the Halacha Moshe MiSinai is upgraded to the status of a doraisa. And we're going to apply the principle of suffix doraisa l'chumra. Meaning, the Halacha Moshe MiSinai doesn't fall shy of the doraisa. If, on the other hand, the Halacha Moshe MiSinai is creating a new category, it's revealing a new legal reality that we weren't aware of, then in such a case, the Halacha Moshe MiSinai stands on its own, independent of the Torah, independent of that which is explicit in the Torah. And insofar as it stands alone, the Rambam says, you've created a brand new category, a legal category, then we're going to say this is not equal to Doraisa. It's not in the Torah. and therefore halacha of suffix is lakula. If you followed me so far, I think I could plug this all in to the Tosas Rid regarding whether you should buy Ner Chanukah or buy Yayin for Kiddush. And Rava's conclusion was that you buy Shemen for Ner Chanukah, and you therefore override the mitzvah of Kiddush. But wait a minute. Tosas Rid says the mitzvah of Kiddush ala Yayin is Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai. But what we're suggesting is that is this Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai revealing something about Zecharas Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsha, or is it creating something new? If it's shedding a new light and telling me how to fulfill the mitzvah of Zecharas Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsha, then it has the upgraded status of a Doraisa. It's identical with a Doraisa and Safek L'Chumra. If, on the other hand, the Halacha Moshe MiSinai is adding a whole new category, in Lamda Shesprach we call it a new Kiyum, and it's not revealing something about the Kiyum of Zecharas Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsha, then insofar it's a brand new entity that's independent and stands on its own 2 feet, then we could be Mekil, and we would say Safek L'Kula, for example, and maybe we could be Mekil to the point in which if we have some pressing need to forfeit that Kiyum of the Halacha Moshe MiSinai, then we might consider doing so. So let's now analyze the Halacha Moshe MiSinai of Yayin L'Kiddush. Yesh Lachar. Is the Halacha Moshe MiSinai revealing something about the mitzvah of Zecharas Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsha, or is the Halacha Moshe MiSinai creating a brand new Kiyum, and it's independent of Zecharas Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsha? We're going to suggest, based on the careful reading of the Tosas Rid, that the Halacha Moshe MiSinai of Yayin or Pas L'Kiddush is not revealing something about how to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush. The mitzvah of Kiddush could be fulfilled without Yayin and without Pas, just with Amiras Divrei Sheva. But rather, the Halacha Moshe MiSinai is coming to generate and establish a brand new Kiyum. Not the Kiyum of Zecharas Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsha, but rather the Kiyum of Seudah Shabbos. And what the Halacha Moshe MiSinai establishes now is that in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Seudah Shabbos, you're going to use the Kiddush ala Yayin or Kiddush ala Pas as a means to set up a Seudah Shabbos, so that you could now be Makayim the mitzvah of Seudah Shabbos. So that now the Yayin and the Pas of Kiddush, based on the Halacha Moshe MiSinai, is only a machshir, meaning it's only a tool, an instrument, to create a framework within which we could be Makayim a different mitzvah, namely the mitzvah of Suda. I mean, just to dramatize this, I would tell you the following. If the Tosas Rid were to author a Sefer HaMitzvahs, he would count 2 different mitzvahs in Taryag. One mitzvah of Zecharas Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsha, and one mitzvah of Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai of Seudah Shabbos. And when the Tosas Rid, again, I'll read those cryptic words once again. He says that you require Pas or Yain Kidesh Yeh Oneg B'Makom Kriya. It means to Tehei Seudah B'Makom Kiddush. And you need Seudah B'Makom Kiddush, so the Kiddush now becomes an instrument, a means to an end to set up a Makom Seudah, so that now the Seudah that I eat has the status of a Seudah Shabbos, to facilitate and to make it possible to fulfill the mitzvah of Seudah Shabbos. Well, if that be the case, then the Halacha Moshe MiSinai is creating a brand new kiyum, and it stands on its own. It does not, we cut the umbilical cord to the Torah itself, meaning to the Kra, to the scripture. It's not revealing something about Zecharas Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsha. And therefore we could lower the level of its chumrah, of its chiyuv, by 1 notch. It's no longer a full-fledged identical doraisa. We would say Safek L'Kula. And therefore, if you have a pressing need to push off the yayin or pas l'kiddush, for example, Persume Nisa of Chanukah, then we're not giving up a doraisa for the sake of Persume Nisa. We're giving up Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai for the sake of Persume Nisa. And what level of Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai are we giving up? The level that's one notch lower, because it's creating a brand new category and a brand new key. It's not like the case of Nekev in the separating, that's in the wall that separates the two receptacles of Mayim, because there, the purpose and the measurement of the Nekev is to reveal something about Tefillah. Does this qualify as a Tefillah in 40 Saw? Does it not qualify as a Tefillah? So if it's shedding a light on a Doraisa that's written in the Pasuk, then we say Safek L'chumra. I was very excited about this. I shared it with my Chavrusa just a few days ago, and he liked it. But, there's always a but. Now we'll get back to Bobby's question in a minute. He said the Tosas Rid requires pas or yayin even for Havdala. And he says that if a Nazir needs yayin for Havdala, then so be it. He will make Havdala al yayin. Now, presumably, although I tried to fight with my Chavrus about this point, but presumably this halach of yayin in Havdala, which overrides Nazir according to the Tosas Read, is halacha Moshe MiSinai. But l'chora, this halacha Moshe MiSinai, as opposed to halacha MiSinai of yayin l'kiddush, is right on the mark. It's on a doraisa level. That if the Torah says Zochar Yom Shabbos L'Kadshu, it means Zochreu b'Knisaso v'Zochreu b'Yitziaso. That Havdalah is doraisa because it's part of the mitzvah of Zochar. Now the yayin that's being required for Havdalah is defining the mitzvah of Havdalah of Zochar. It's not creating a brand new mitzvah of Seudah, because there is no mitzvah of Seudah involved in Havdalah. And if you have any doubts about it, you cannot make Havdalah a pas. It'd be really cool if you could make Havdalah a pas, because we always have so much leftover challahs. Why don't we take one of those challahs and use it for Havdalah? So we see that yayin in Havdalah is part of the essential mitzvah of Havdalah, which is part of Zochar Yom Shabbos L'Kadshu. If that be the case, then this halacha Moshe MiSinai, according to our structure, should be upgraded to the status of a doraisa, and it's identical in its chumrah with the doraisa. So let's say, for example, if I only had enough money to buy shemen or to buy yayin for Havdalah, then I should certainly be buying yayin for Havdalah. But nobody says such a thing. It's impossible. Yeah, Joe.
You couldn't also say with Havdalah the same thing, Dibur? You can make Havdalah with Dibur only?
Well, keep in mind, the Nazir says the Tosas Rid
I
will make
know.
Havdalah yayin.
I know, but
If he can be
so that's
Yotzei
what I'm
Havdalah with
asking.
Dibur,
We have
why would we
Havdalah.
override Nazirus for the sake of the yayin? Meaning the Tosas Rid assumes that just like I have to drink the yayin of Kiddush, I have to drink the yayin of Havdalah.
Right, but what's he connecting it to? That it's you connected the Kiddush to Oneg, right? And that's
In the case of Havdalah, you can't do that. So this seems to completely undermine, blow out of the water everything I said until now.
Well, but if you pick up Joe's point, that in other words, really, where are you getting yayin by Havdalah? Where is it coming from?
I don't know. The only answer I could give you is Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai. I don't have a better
Oh,
answer.
no, but I'll say to you that it's coming from the chiyuv of yayin, like for oinek for suuda, even though you don't make a suuda on Havdala at Havdala, but the concept of having yayin as your marker for Havdala is you're learning it from some aspect of Shabbos coming in. It's not. It's like
No, but what
there's
I'm
no.
asking you, Bobby, is the following. My thesis is that if the Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai of Yayin is coming to set up a new kiyum that's extraneous to Kiddush, let's say, and that's Su'uda, then I could say, let's be Mekil. But in the case of Havdalah, I don't see how I could set up another kiyum of Su'uda
But
extraneous or
it,
separated from the kiyum of Havdalah. It's got to be part of the essential mitzvah of Havdalah.
it's not a kiyum. It's not a kiyum of Havdalah or the Suda, but it's learned from that. In other words, where do you learn? Where's Yain coming in Havdalah? Where are you getting it from? Yeah, you have to know where you get it from. So you want to say it's halacha l'moshe Sinai, then it's own halacha l'moshe Sinai. But that's not the way it's learned out. It's mashma that there's some connection to Shabbos coming in and to Shabbos going out.
But again, if Shabbos going out requires yayin, I don't know how you can play games with that unless you set up another queue,
Well,
which we don't have. We don't have Su'ud. But okay, I have to go now, and you also have to go. But let me just reiterate Bobby's question from before, and that'll be food for thought. Maybe between now and next week we can come up with some answer. But if we're saying that Halacha LeMoshe MiSinai is to be downgraded a little bit in this case because Yain for Kiddush is a separate kiyum of Suda, then why is it that a Nazir should be allowed to drink Yain of Kiddush? Why not say that, the Isser of Yain Nazir is more chamur than you know, than the Drabanan of Persume Nisa? Because in the case of Halacha Moshe Sinai, if you would Bishlem, I'll say it that way. Bishlem, if you would upgrade it and equalize it to a Doraisa, then I could understand that it could override a Doraisa of Yain Nazir. But if you're saying that, Nazir and Yain is in the Torah, but Yain for Kiddush is Halacha Moshe Sinai, and not only is Halacha Moshe Sinai, but it's less than a Doraisa because we're saying Suffolk Lakula, and we're saying it generates a whole new kiyum of Suda. Who
but, but,
says
but,
that should
but
override, the
yeah. So I'll say to you that
Easter Nazir?
there's a chiluk. You can say that mitzad mushba v'oimed, even a weak halacha Moshe Sinai is still
Right.
considered mushba v'oimed.
Right. That obviously that's the way you have to go. You have to say that it's like there's a chovas gavra, so to speak, to drink the wine for whatever reason, a full-fledged doraisa or less than a full-fledged doraisa, but that's enough to say that the Nazirus, right, the neder of Nazirus is not chal on shtias yayin shel kiddush. Okay, I have to apologize, but
Yeah.
I got a little messed up today. I got
Thank you.
caught up in something, but thank you very much, and
Thank you.
have a
Yeah.